Hi everyone, this is Marika Lamoureux and I'm going to explain how to interpret interactions. Now, you may be celebrating because this is the very end of the content for Stats and Methods and you're pretty excited that it's all about to be over. But I'm going to be celebrating because now you finally get to kind of understand and get into the stuff that psychologists regularly do and to understand kind of the nitty-gritty details of statistics that you would see in an actual journal article. So I think that's pretty cool. So here is the result section that we analyzed when we looked at main effects. And we skipped over the sentences that had to do with interactions. And now in this explanation, I'm going to talk about those interactions and what they all mean. So this first one, I'm using the same articles that we used to understand main effects. So I'm just going to really quickly remind you about what those articles were about. So the first article, the researchers were interested in understanding how whether the music was on or off while people were studying, it's interfered with reading comprehension and object recall, depending on whether or not you were an introvert or an extrovert. So an interaction is saying, does the effect of one of the independent variables depend on the level of another independent variable? And I know that doesn't really make sense, so I'm going to say it a different way, which is, do you need to know more about the study than just one independent variable to accurately understand what's happening in the results section or what's happened to the participants' data in the study? And another way of saying that is there some special combination of independent variables that creates a unique effect that is something that you can't really capture by just understanding the main effects. So for this study, if we want to look at an interaction between the music being on or off and personality, what you're trying to assess is, does the effect of whether the music was on or off depend on whether someone was an introvert or an extrovert? So here are the couple of sentences that deal with the dependent variable of immediate recall. And if you remember, we looked already at the main effects and we found that there was a main effect. I'm sorry, you can hear my dog sneezing in the background. That there was a main effect of whether the music was on or off. So if you recall, people remembered more for the immediate object recall task when the music was on than when the music was off. And what an interaction is going to tell you is, did that effect depend on whether the person was an introvert or an extrovert, or just in general, did it not matter at all whether they were an introvert or an extrovert? And that's what an interaction is going to tell you. So the interaction says, does the effect of whether the music was on or off on immediate object recall depend on whether someone was an introvert or an extrovert? And if you look up at the highlighted part, you can see that NS, which means not significant. So the interaction is not significant, so the answer to that question is no. So you can say there's nothing unique about the combination of the music being on or off and whether someone is an introvert or an extrovert on immediate object recall. So what you are learning from the fact that there's no main effect is that the complete picture for the dependent variable of immediate object recall is all that matters is whether the music was on or off. We know from the main effect that people remember more when the music is on than when the music is off. And that's not qualified by whether they were introverts or extroverts. All that mattered was whether the music was on or off. So an interaction is basically giving you another layer of the picture of understanding this data. Here's the data for the delayed recall of the pictures. So it's the same independent variables with a different dependent variable. And If you recall, we looked at the main effects and we found that there were no main effects of either of the IVs. So if you just knew whether or not somebody was an introvert or an extrovert, you would say that personality type doesn't influence delayed object recall. Or if you just knew whether the music was on or off, you would say the music being on or off doesn't influence delayed object recall. And with an interaction, what we're going to be looking at is, does the effect of one variable depend on the level of the other variable? So is there something kind of unique about how these two variables work together to predict this dependent variable? So here's the question we're asking. And if you look up at the highlighted section of the text, you can see that there is a significant interaction. So the answer to that question is yes. Now we need to interpret that interaction. And the difficult thing about interactions that students find is that the fact that there is an interaction does not tell you what the outcome is, what's going on, what the effect is. You actually have to look at the means to figure it out. So if we look at the means, if we look at introverts and we compare the music being on or off, we can see that introverts perform better with the music off than when the music is on. And for extroverts, we can see that they perform better when the music is on than when the music is off. So this is kind of a perfect illustration of an interaction in the sense that the effect actually switches depending on whether you're an introvert or an extrovert. So here's how I would write that sentence. Another way that you could say it is that extroverts perform better than introverts when the music is on, and that introverts perform better than extroverts when the music is off. So you can write this description several different ways. All that matters is that you communicate to your audience what is going on in the data in words, that you explain to your audience sort of what the effect looks like. And with most interactions, depending on sort of how you see the data, what you see when you look at the data, you might describe it different ways. So there will be lots of different ways that are correct to describe an interaction. But the most important thing to remember is that you need to be describing in words what's going on. So what I'm going to do for the next slide is I'll put the information up, and I want you to pause the video and try and interpret the interaction. And then when you're ready, unpause the video and we'll discuss it. Here's what the sentence looks like. It's, again, the exact same thing. You're just changing it for the dependent variable of reading comprehension. And we're going to go look up and look at the interaction, and we can see that there is a significant interaction between the two variables. Now we're going to look at the means. And when you look at those means, at least when I look at those means, what I see is that the mean for reading comprehension for the introverts, for the music being on, is lower than all the other means. And the other means for reading comprehension for the other three conditions all look to be hanging out kind of in the same, around the same kind of like 9-ish, 9.3-ish sort of space. And those means look fairly similar to me. But the mean for the introverts for music being on looks different. So this is the sentence I would write. So the way I see it is being an introvert and having the music on is pretty bad, but it doesn't really do anything for the extroverts. So now we'll talk about the second study, and just to remind you, this is the one where they were interested in how being in the field influences cognitive abilities. And here's the sentence for the 2-minute map search scores. And I'm going to let you guys look at this and pause the video, and when you're ready, unpause the video and I'll talk you through it. So here's what the sentence looks like. You're going to say, does the effect on map searchabilities of whether participants were on a survival field exercise depend on when they were completing the activity? And if you look at the highlighted section, you can see that it says NS, not significant. So there's no significant interactions, which means there's nothing unique about the combination of those two IVs. And I'll put the next one up and pause the video, and when you think you're ready, unpause it. Again, the sentence looks exactly the same. You're just changing it to the dependent variable to say lottery task. You can see that it says NS, which means not significant, so there's no significant interaction, and that's what my sentence looks like. So I hope that this has been very straightforward, and now you understand how to interpret an interaction and how to find it in the text. And you feel comfortable understanding that interactions are hard to define because what an interaction is depends on kind of what the data looks like. So you can't say, well, an interaction always means X, because interactions mean just that there's a difference in how one independent variable influences the dependent variable depending on the second independent variable. But what that difference is, the interaction doesn't tell you. You have to look at the means. As always, if you have any questions, I strongly encourage you to email me or come to my office hours, email the TA, or go to the TA's office hours, contact a classmate, or go to the tutoring center and get free tutoring.